Derek? Okay, before we
You are now live.
Good. Before we get to the main agenda, I've just got a bit of the normal preamble for you. So just to remember, please, that this meeting is being recorded and hopefully live streamed, that the meeting's being conducted in accordance with the Council's remote meetings protocol and procedure rules. Please, can I ask that you indicate with your virtual hand if you'd like to make a contribution. Please, can I ask that you keep your microphone on mute when not speaking. It is our preference for people to have cameras on, but we understand that sometimes that can affect the quality of your signal. So if you need to turn them off, please do. There will be voting via general assent. I'll ask if anybody disagrees with the items on the agenda. Joanna is going to record attendance via the list on the screen. Are you happy to do that, Joanna?
Yep, that's fine.
Thank you very much. We have some good news. Sue, who is our early years rep on the schools forum, has received an award. I understand it's the Belle Tative Lifetime Achievement Award that was presented by Neil Leith, the CEO of the Early Years Alliance, back in May. And Sue, that was because of your many years of outstanding service to the sector. So many congratulations.
Thank you, Stuart.
That's great news. Good stuff, and well deserved, I've no doubt. Before I do the welcomes, Joanna, are we aware of any apologies?
I've not been notified of any.
I've had a message to say that Jenny Baker may not be able to attend, and Tim is trying to get in, but he's having a difficulty with the app. So Tim will join us shortly, and we may not see Jenny today. Can I welcome Roy Bailey, officially the new executive member for children and young people, and he is here today in an observer category as opposed to a member. But Councillor Bailey, we welcome your comments and contributions as we go through. So a warm welcome. We're also welcoming James Fallows, who is a graduate finance trainee working for the council, and he's joining this call as part of his training. So welcome, James. And we may also have Patrick Grant here, who is somebody from the LA funding policy team of the ESFA, and part of their remit is to monitor schools forums and assess how effectively they are operating, although I don't think I can see him. So they may join partway through the meeting. They could be viewing proceedings via live streaming. Okay, there we go. He has the public link. So we welcome Patrick, and also to say that Debbie, this may be your last meeting of Schools Forum, and I must get the number of years right, but certainly 37 years worth of service to Bracknellers over at Sandhurst School, and many years on the Schools Forum. So a huge contribution to the borough. So Debbie, thank you very, very much.
You're very welcome. 22 days till the end of term, including today.
And you're not counting them at all. I'm looking to my friend Paul to make sure I've done everything I should have there.
I think you followed the script very well, Stuart.
Thanks very much, Paul. I was pretending I wasn't reading off of notes there, but thank you. Okay, so in that case, I haven't been informed of any substitute members either, unless anybody is here as a substitute. In that case, declarations of interest. So I have a couple of comments here, but does anybody want to declare any interests on items on the agenda? Keith.
Item 8, please, on surplus balances.
Item 8 on balances. Yeah, thank you very much, Keith. And then just a reminder that if anything comes up in the meeting, that you need to declare an interest in, please do. Okay, moving on to item number 3. So first of all, the minutes. Are we all happy with the minutes from the previous meeting? Okay, I can see lots of nods, so thank you very much for that. There are some matters arising from that. Paul, just one about the constitution and membership. Did you want to say something, or is that me?
I think we just need to give an update where we are on recruiting to the vacancies. So if I just quickly confirm that the vacancy on the local authority side is in respect of a 16 to 19 provider representative, and we've always struggled to get someone on that. So it's basically the college is who we rely on to fill in that position. Have contacted the college but haven't been able to get a reply out of them yet, so I will try that again, but to say, based on previous experience, it may not bear fruit, but I'll keep trying. So I haven't got anywhere yet with them, but I'll keep trying. And I think there's something on the academy as well, Stuart, that you were looking at. Yeah,
so there are 2 academy vacancies currently, and there will be a 3rd vacancy in September, as we've said, Debbie retiring from Forum. We have got 2 new members who've come forward. That is Katie from King's Binfield and Gareth, who will be the new head at Sandhurst. But we haven't been able to fill the 3rd vacancy ready for September, but we will. Completely coincidentally, Paul, I have had an email from a primary head from a maintained school offering.
It's on Zoom. Sorry. Get myself off. Sorry, Stuart.
That's all right, Chris. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No worries. What do we do, Paul, if somebody from a maintained school has got an interest? Do they just email you?
By coincidence, I had a meeting with that head teacher today, so we spoke about it. But the representatives of primary head teachers come through FAB, so it's for FAB to nominate those. So next time there's a vacancy, that head teacher would contact FAB and make herself available. So I've had that conversation by coincidence today.
Lovely, thank you very much. The only other action that was listed on there was, I think Paul and I were supposed to meet about the wording. If we remember last time, we were asked to comment on whether we thought appropriate arrangements were in place, and we agreed that we would put not yet for both items under that. And so that has been recorded in the minutes, as Paul and I agreed. Okay, any other matters arising that people want to raise? Good. Excellent. Thank you very much. In that case, let's move to item number 4, changes to the early years free entitlements. Cherry, I think we're coming to you for that one.
I think you are, Stuart. Thank you. So this report really is threefold. We put our budget forward to Schools Forum some months ago, and then the spring budget came forward, and we were made aware that there will be additional funding allocated for early years in the autumn. So this report is for Forum to agree the principles on how we spend that money. We also want to ratify a process that we put into place with some of the members of Schools Forum before we were able to bring it to Forum. We had a couple of settings who were in financial difficulties and wanting to change their model of delivery, but were unable to do that without some reassurance that we could support them. And then also to talk about the potential impact of the expansion of early years that is being proposed starting from April next year. We also then last night received some more information from the DFE, but it always comes just before a meeting. So whereas we thought the money would go into the DSG, they notified us last night that we will be getting an early years supplementary grant. But although we've got no firm detail yet, we're hoping that the principles that we're putting forward in this paper for spend is going to meet those principles, but we can't confirm that until we get more information. So I don't know if anybody, having read the paper, have got any questions, but the principles that we're putting forward, we've agreed with our early years forum already, and they were happy with the principles of basically any additional money we're getting. We have agreed that it would go into the base rate so that all providers would be treated the same and all have additional money in their base rate. The business development, the sustainable model is really, we're working with 2 providers and we've given them reassurance that we will support them up to a certain amount of money over 3 terms whilst they build their business models. It's too early yet to say how effective that's being, but there will be a meeting taking place with one of the providers very soon. We're not really sure of the full impact of what's going to happen over the next 2 years. Part of the information that came from the department last night was they've given us a bit of a tool to look at what our capacity is going to look like and sufficiency, which we've got to complete before the 14th of July, I think it is, and send that back. So that might give us a little bit more of information about what childcare we need moving forward. There is going to be an impact on capacity for us. The team already are, not struggling, but they're already working very hard to meet the current need. So it'll be interesting to see what this is going to mean as we move forward. And we also do have another project going on that will take up quite a lot of time over the coming year. The last thing in the paper, it said that we would bring revisions to the budget in September. However, with the news from last night, we're not sure that we will be bringing a new budget as such in September, but just confirming the additional money we're getting through the grant and how that's going to be allocated. Paul, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to that following our brief conversation earlier.
No, I've got nothing to add to that. Thank you very much, Cherry.
Okay, thank you. So I don't know if Forum have got any questions at all.
Anybody got any queries, questions? Okay, just to say that under 5.14, Cherry did send around some draft information to myself, Liz and Sue, I think, to get some early feedback so that it could move ahead as quickly as possible. But I think if there's no questions and you've consulted with the early years body, then I think we can move to the recommendations. No questions, are we sure? Go on, Liz.
It's not a question, but I'm just delighted that the government acknowledged that we need to have some urgent funding. So anything that anybody's done to influence this is wonderful, because it's going to be difficult for everybody. But the early years, we have to get that right. We have to invest in the youngest children, or we will have a legacy of years to make up from. So thank you for everybody who's putting that time in.
Lovely, thank you. In that case, can we move to page 11 and the recommendation? So first of all, then, that we agree, in accordance with the views of the Early Years Forum, to the announced increase in early years funding is allocated according to the principles in paragraph 5.4 and 5.5. And then secondly, the process for supporting business development to secure sufficient sustainable early years and childcare provision as set out in 5.10 to 5.14. Does anybody disagree? Okay, in that case, Forum agrees to 2.1 and 2.2. And then secondly, the Forum notes the points raised in item 2.3 and 2.4. We've seen this document in advance of the meeting. So unless there's any disagreement, I'm happy to note those 2 points as well. Well done, Cherry.
Thank you.
That was a quick one.
Oh, that's great, Stuart. I'm happy with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, on to item number 5, please. I think we're coming to Chris for this. An update on delivering better value, please.
Okay. Can everybody hear me, first of all? You heard me before when I wasn't supposed to speak. I hope I can be equally brief here at this stage, but just a bit of background. The DfE have got 2 programmes for high needs blocks, and members of the Schools Forum will be highly aware that high needs blocks are in crisis around the country. And there are 2 levels of intervention. The first level is the so-called safety valve, where large amounts of money, and as an example, Surrey were given 100 million by the government quite recently, over 5 years, 100 million pounds. in support for their high needs block. If people want to know a bit more about that, I'll say that after the item. So that's the major program. Last I looked, by the way, there were 6 authorities out of 151 in that pilot. I met by chance somebody I work for in Surrey at a FD19 meeting on Friday, called Liz Mills. She's Director of Education in Surrey. And then asked me about why we hadn't been able to ask questions of a DFE presentation. I said I would have asked about the safety file. She said, "Oh, we got it." And I said, I wasn't aware of any authorities that had got it. Anyway, when I looked at the DFE website, 52 local authorities have now got safety valve funding, which is millions. So quite a few have got 20 million, for example. We're in the second tier of that program, which is called Delivering Better Value, I beg your pardon. It's still a good program, but by contrast, ours is worth £1 million over 2 years. And it's not just support for the high needs block in a major sense. It's for us to do pilot projects and work that seeks to make us more efficient and effective. But just a quick word on that. We had this organisation, Newton Europe, which is apparently a top European consultancy. And when they came in, I wasn't here, but they spoke to Kelly Williams, and they said, well, we were told by the DFE we could come in and help local authorities because they were very inefficient with their high needs block expenditure. That is not true. It is a crisis that comes out of other directions, and I'll say more about that if members want. What they said, but the program they've delivered with us, I think, is a really good one. It's limited, and as I say, it's £1 million, but there are 3 areas: training for schools in the area of autistic spectrum, which is very, it's the most common reason for EHCPs. That's about nearly 100,000. Kennel Lane outreach, a number of schools, ASC and associated conditions. That's 370,000. Then the in-house transition support, 416, and project management, about 120,000. To say a little bit more about those programs, the ASC, we're providing that through our service. We're gearing up for that now. We are prioritising sort of through triage where schools that get it, and it's being organised now. The Kennel Lane Outreach Hub, that is also being organised. There is one small capital part of that program that involves Sandhurst School, but a lot of other work is being planned now. It's going to take place in the next school year. And then there's the in-house transition team. I hope that secondary schools will find this very, very effective. We're employing 5 high needs LSAs. They're going to be employed in 6 schools, so we're going to have to work out how it's done. There's going to be one lead for that team. We're going to start recruiting in about November, and they'll start working with identified pupils, again on a triage basis, in about January to assist in their individual transition to all of the secondary schools. So that's pretty much the program. It works over 2 years. I think it's very well designed and will be very useful. Personally, I am very interested in getting more support for the council with the high needs block overspend that we have, which at the moment is well over 6 million, and it's projected to increase significantly as a structural overspend to over 30 million in 4 years' time. So this is for information, Chair. So no other purpose. So I'm very, very happy to take comments and questions.
Okay, any comments or questions? There's no voting item on this. This is just an opportunity to share and raise any queries. Roger.
Hi, Chris. Any support for primary schools at all? Because they could.
Yes. So in the outreach and autistic spectrum training, there's support. You could argue that in the transition there is a certain amount of support for primaries, because of course the pupils that they'll be working with will be in year 6 at primary. So yes, the primary sector is well involved in this project.
That's in transition, Chris, and that's for the intention of understandably making a successful transition to
yes, it is
secondary school. But what about a successful transition to primary school? And what about youngsters in primary school, some of which do struggle greatly. And this is an area, Chris, that I know primary school heads have been calling for many a long year, for some kind of support and an additional support. And yet the focus seems to be almost completely on secondary schools to me.
So the two of the three projects are not focused on secondary schools. I mentioned Sandhurst because there's a small capital project going on there. This is for primary and secondary. For instance, Kennel Lane goes from age 3, it's actually age 2 legally, but they take from age 3 to 19. So it involves both sectors, as does the autistic spectrum condition training. Where you do make a valid point about transition, and there are more and more problems, particularly post-COVID, but not solely post-COVID, with pupils going into primary. However, in terms of the scale of the problem and the scale of the issues, particularly for pupils with special educational need, the transition from primary to secondary is the most problematic. And there, what we're experiencing is pupils with EHCPs that are coping in mainstream in primary, that are going to specialist provision, sometimes independent provision, in year 7. That shouldn't be the case. You often need a higher level of support. So this particular in-house transition does prioritise secondaries. While I don't make an apology for that, I do understand the point you're making about going into primary. I'm sympathetic with that, and we can look at different work that we do to support that in future, and I'll certainly write a note about it. But please be assured that 2 of the 3 projects are focused on primary as well as secondary, and that the in-house transition should also have some limited help for primaries because the pupils will be there for 6 months.
Early identification of these youngsters preschool and intervention early will actually help mitigate and reduce problems later on. So I really do think that there needs to be more of a focus preschool and linking with primary school so that the issues are less than they might be. And while I'm talking, I do remain very concerned that the level of support for schools in dealing with SEND pupils when they need help and they need resources are, in my experience, insufficient. And I worry, and I'll make this the last point, I do worry that there is such an effort to save money, and understandably having youngsters in mainstream schools is very, very important, but sufficient resources need to go alongside in order to try and help those youngsters in schools succeed. And penny pinching is not going to help them and is going to lead to further problems in the long term.
Okay, I need to address those 2 problems sort of square on. First of all, there's no penny pinching or huge cost savings. This council is spending what it needs to, in fact, a lot more than the budget each year. It's needs led. Okay, just let me answer. You ask the questions. I need to be able to give them the time to answer. Yes. So it is not penny pinching, is not cost cutting. We do need to be as efficient as possible, and I've mentioned this specifically in our approach to the SEN strategy, which members just approved has a call-in period, and we'll be announcing next week. So it is absolutely not penny pinching. On the second point you make about specialist support, we've got very good specialist support in Bracknell Forest, and I'm proud of the work the specialist support staff do. But you have identified one issue about which I identify, which is a lack of specialist places. The main issue with specialist places lies with the government of the day. And the legislation that was produced in 2014 that has resulted, rather than fewer EHCPs versus old statements, it's resulted in a well over 50% increase in that time. Without capital investment, so councils have been left on their own. This council has got investment for specialist provision, and we are looking at more investment in 3 areas. First of all, resource places in primary and secondary school, in addition to those we have already got. Secondly, in making sure we properly support and codify those in terms of entry, which we haven't done at the moment. We're showing 0 on our on our Send To return. Thirdly, resource units, where it's more highly specialised in primary and secondary. And another one, looking at additional special school capacity in addition to the ASC school that we got through the Free Schools programme. Members will be aware that our second bid for SEMH provision did not succeed, and I'm talking to senior officers and members of the council about whether we need to make further investments. There won't be a decision. I need to do a place and capital plan, but I can assure you that we are attendant on this as a major issue in the system.
Okay, Roger, I've got some comments. I'll come back to you, but Debbie's had a hand up.
I know that this report is, sorry, there's a helicopter come past. I know this report is just to provide an update and that there's no recommendations and so on, but it's probably worth noting a declaration of interest here against me for Santa School, because we will be likely to be the hub for other children from other schools to come to when Ken and Lynn are working.
Thank you, Debbie. Roger, I think there's a couple of things there. I think it is worth noting, and I think Chris has, about the importance of that early identification and in-school support. So I absolutely agree with you there, and I think that's worth making sure we've minuted so that Chris has got an opportunity to consider that. However, several of us in Forum were invited to that Delivering Better Value, and I think it's fair to say that Newton Europe led on that, the DFE partner, very much their investigation, very much their identification of what would save money, which is, I think, the point you're raising, driven by what will deliver better value. And that's where those projects have come out from. So, and it was a very quick turnaround to access the money. So just, I know Chris wasn't involved, but just to give you a bit of context to that. Cheryl, is that a fair enough comment about how it went?
Yes, and that although, Roger, we looked at many prospective areas to do projects, and early years, Cherry gave us quite a substantial input on early years, transition into school, etc., and early identification, that the limit to the money, they then reduced down the number of projects and went back to data, and the data sources were saying the biggest demand was transition primary to secondary. So they went back using the data as a basis and developed those three key projects. Ideally, I think we all agree with you, that is an area, the early years and the early years transition is a piece of work that we would all like to do. Under that project, unfortunately, it didn't get through, but Cherry is still considering that and how we can move things forward. So it's not off the table. It's just one of those pieces of work that we are going to put in to consider how else we can progress it in the future. But thank you for raising it.
Thank you, Roger. Chris, is there anything else you want to add there?
No, just aside from, there is a lot we do in terms of early intervention in the early years. The Code of Practice obviously mentions that, and we will do a lot more work with schools next year on what needs to be ordinarily available within schools' budgets and the graduated approach, which is the most thorough thing I've seen in my education career in terms of both providing early intervention and a path through to extra resources when they're needed. So I think that's it from me, Stuart, and thanks very much for asking. Okay,
any further comments? In that case, thank you for the update, and Roger, we note that point that you've made. Thank you. Okay, update on College Hall Pupil Referral Unit, item 6. Cheryl, is that you?
Zoe has joined us, so if Zoe would like to outline, and I will add in comments as and when needed, please, Stuart.
Okay, thanks. Over to you, Zoe.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Yeah, this item is really for information, just to provide an update on some of the budget decisions that have taken place regarding College Hall. So Forum will be aware of the financial and wider challenges surrounding College Hall at the moment, which were identified as requiring some further work, which has now taken place. So one of the other items I think that's on the agenda for this evening notes that there's a £384,000 overspend on the College Hall budget in the 22 to 23 financial year. A review that was undertaken of those variances identified that they were largely due to exceptional factors. So examples of that include in the autumn term having to commission additional alternative provision overseen by College Hall in order to meet the needs of the pupils. There have been costs as a result of additional interim leadership capacity being needed. Also, in the summer term, the management committee served notice on the SLA for the home tuition and outreach service, which has come back in within the local authority, and that had a significant impact on the College Hall budget. So 368,000 of that extraordinary variance and deficit has been charged to the general high needs block budget. So that was the first item, the first element. But the other part of this paper is that a clear need has been identified to review the budget at College Hall for a number of reasons. I think it was agreed, as has been seen in mainstream schools, that the needs of the pupils coming into College Hall are much more complex than they have been in the past. A number of the pupils coming into College Hall have been arriving without EHCPs, but with significant SEND needs. And there's been a lot of additional work in order to secure the right support for those pupils. College Hall, during COVID and beyond, has operated a number of satellite sites, and running those additional sites and the transport needed to get pupils to them and back from them has generated additional costs. There's a significant amount of additional capacity needed in order to provide training and support for staff at College Hall. It's incredibly difficult to recruit for alternative provision and for pupil referral units. And there are unqualified and inexperienced staff working at College Hall. The curriculum at the moment is also being reviewed to include more turnaround provision, so that pupils can access College Hall earlier, receive therapeutic interventions and then be reintegrated into mainstream education. So that obviously brings with it additional cost. There are issues around the site at College Hall that make it very difficult to run effectively. And obviously that additional factor of the outreach and tuition service coming out of the management of College Hall. So as a result of a lot of these additional factors, local authority officers worked very closely with the management committee and the consultant head teacher at College Hall to consider a number of different staffing and budget models in order to address a number of areas for development at the PRU. One of the proposals that's noted in the paper, which is broadly based on a 1:8 pupil teacher ratio, the third option, was decided upon on the basis that that should be sufficient to run College Hall effectively once it's moved to a business as usual context. The other thing that is noted in the paper is that it's likely that additional funding beyond the agreed budget will be needed within this financial year, as it's likely that there will be additional exceptional expenses around the running of College Hall this year, as well as they continue. It was really an information paper to note the fact that that portion of the deficit from last year has been charged to the high needs block, and also to note the new budget that's been agreed for College Hall, which has resulted in a significant per pupil cost compared to 22-23. So I hope that's it's quite a top level summary, but I don't know if anyone's got any specific questions or comments. Or Cheryl, if you've got anything you want to add.
I think that was a very balanced and measured briefing from Zoe. Obviously, we are working with the school, with the management committee, the chair, the exec head, to progress things at College Hall. And indeed, we have a meeting tomorrow to have a detailed discussion moving forward. So I think we're ready to take questions. Thank you.
Okay, any questions or comments? There's nothing for us to agree here, but any observations from members? Okay, in that case, I'll add a couple of comments in. I think that there has been some concerns from schools around the operation and accessibility of the PRU for a considerable amount of time. So, Zoe, you were kind enough to contact me in advance of forum about this, so that College Hall could have some assurance to be able to recruit for September. So I thoroughly support, and I hope forum members agree that College Hall did need that investment. It does need to be put on a sustainable footing, because we can't keep operating it the way it is at the moment. So I'm grateful for the authority for having investigated this and having taken the time to put it on a long-term footing, but also to recognise that getting to that 1:8 ratio is not realistic for the current year. They'll need extra support, and therefore making an allocation to get them back up to speed in the current financial year. I think it's also worth noting, and you've mentioned it, that the site is not appropriate. And I can see colleagues around the room nodding, and that does need further consideration by the local authority. And I think in forum previously, we have mentioned capital and the capital funds which are available and may be available in the future, and that I hope College Hall is considered in the decisions around any capital investment. I'm saying a lot for myself there, but I don't want to speak on behalf of forum. Do others agree? I can see Tim.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Stuart, about the capital bid. It isn't fit for purpose, and also in terms of its location in Bracknell, I'm not sure whether. So, if anything is to be considered in terms of capital projects or even moving the location of College Hall, I think that needs to be considered. Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, Tim. Roger.
I'm just interested in whether the 1:8 ratio is a feasible ratio for working with children with difficulties.
I think one thing to say, in the paper, it notes that it's broadly a 1:8 pupil teacher ratio. So yes, in the staffing model, it's based on groups of 8, but within that you would have one teacher, one either behaviour support assistant or one teaching assistant in that class. So it would be 2 adults to 8 pupils, but also within the structure they're also hoping to have a behaviour support assistant who would be able to travel, take pupils out or visit those different groups. An additional kind of I think the some specialist ELSA support, for example, that would be able to support the needs of those pupils. So it's much a higher ratio in terms of adult to pupil, but in terms of the teacher, it's 1:8.
You're happy with that, Roger? Yeah. Thank you. Liz.
My thought was just, it was a very well researched paper. I thought it read easily. That's why I'm not going to make many comments on it. But what's the feasibility of us being able to move to 1:8 smoothly? Because obviously that's what we want. And you're mentioning, Zoe, that we're going to need to inject some more money across the next financial year. How much?
That's
And-
something that we're working on right now, Liz, at the moment, and some of that will be about securing the leadership capacity, because a part of that, getting that staffing model up and running, a lot of that is about ensuring that the staff who are there at College Hall are given the appropriate support, so that they've got the skills, the knowledge, and the understanding that they can teach those classes effectively. So a large part of it is about really building the leadership capacity, increasing the training, and skilling up the staff, as much as it is getting those ratios in place in terms of the numbers.
Okay, are there any other comments? Zoe, thank you very much. I think it would be useful maybe to come back at some point for an update on how that's going, and certainly if there's any information on site or updates, I think the forum would be grateful to hear that. And I think that sort of brings us to an end of the items related to the high needs block. So I didn't know if Councillor Bailey, you wanted to make any comments about SEN or anything on the items we've discussed so far.
Yes, I'm unmuted. As several will know, I'm really new to this, but I'm on a steep learning curve. And already, obviously the key priority, one of the key priorities for this new Labour administration is focused around SEND. We know that it needs rapid improvement, and we're very supportive of all the work that the officers are currently doing. And it will remain a priority, I promise you that. I'm here to listen and to learn. I'm meeting with all the relevant stakeholders over the next few weeks. Already met some, and that process will continue. Don't expect me to become an expert. I am, though, I do have a PGC. I did teach briefly at Farnborough Sixth Form College. My wife was a deputy head teacher, so teaching is almost in my blood. But I'm on side, and I want to make sure things get better as quickly as possible in Bracknell Forest. I'll leave it there.
Lovely, thank you very much for your support. Okay, if there's no other comments, we'll move on to item number 7, the outturn on the school's budget, and I think we're coming to you, Paul.
Yes, thank you, Stuart. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so if I start off on the outturn for 22-23 report, this is split into 2 parts, this paper. So the majority of it concentrates on reporting back the financial performance on the school's budget in 22-23, and also sets out use of any earmarked reserves that we use to supplement expenditure during the course of the year as well. And the second part of it does give an update on the early views of the council's thinking on what sort of elements, what sort of questions we should be asking schools in our normal financial consultation as to how we develop the 24-25 schools budget. So there's a few bits on there. We'd just like to seek some views tonight on forum members. So if I start off talking about the outturn from 22-23, as expected, there was a significant overspending on the school's budget. It was just over £6 million last year, which is a £600,000 improvement on the previous year. And within that, the high needs block overspent by about £6.3 million. So the high needs block budget was an overspend. Other parts of the school's budget had an underspending to produce that overall net overspending of £6 million. This does actually represent a £1.2 million improvement on the amount we were expecting when we set the budget. And the main reasons why that's occurred is that there have been a reduced number of external placements, and the average cost of placements has been lower than we were projecting when the budget was set. So there is more information around the significant variances in the report at paragraph 6.8. So I'm not intending to go through that in any detail, but obviously that might be an area that you want to ask some questions on in a moment. And Annex A sets out the numbers of the budgets as well, if you're interested in that view of it. I'd also like to draw out the new reserve that's been created for the first time. So that relates to the early years disability access fund. So that's a ring-fence grant that we received as part of the early years DSG, and we want to keep that as a separate entity in our account so we can actually meet those grant conditions and target that money. So there's a small surplus in there, and we set out the purpose of that reserve, which we're asking you to agree tonight as well. There's also a continuation of the liability for this debt. As forum members will know, this is resting with the DfE at the moment. That goes through to 2026. And at this point in time, our accumulated deficit is just over £15 million, nearly £15.5 million. And if we carry on the current projected forecast of £6 to £7 million a year's deficit, that will increase to around £35 million by the time that deficit returns to the council. And obviously, again, we've mentioned this numerous times, that's a significant challenge to our local authority in particular, but it's a challenge that lots of local authorities will be facing at that point in time. And Chris has mentioned about the Delivering Better Value programme. We are hopeful that will help to mitigate some of those areas of overspend, as well as the other actions that we're putting in place as well. So I think that's what I wanted to talk about and highlight in terms of the outturn from last year. So if I stop there, is there any questions on that before we go on to the plans for what we would ask in our consultation for 24-25 budgets?
Any questions or comments? Whilst I'm not sure we can celebrate a £6 million deficit, I think it is some positive news in there that has come in slightly lower than expected, and particularly your comment relating to lower external placements, which I think has been an objective of Forum, certainly for as long as I've sat on it. So there is some progress there. Paul, is that a fair comment?
Yeah, yes, because we were expecting a reduction in our budget plans, but it's been a lot greater than we were expecting in the budget. And obviously they're the areas that have the highest cost, so that's the one that's had a big impact. So yeah, obviously we're really pleased at how that's coming through in the figures now.
Okay, any other questions or queries? Okay, should we go on with the second part then, Paul?
Yeah, okay, so this is just to get a view on two particular questions in the consultation that we're thinking of putting out with schools next term. So there's four. So this is paragraph 615 to 616. So there's four questions we ask every year that are around the actual specific responsibilities of the schools forum. So they're no change from what we normally ask. That's paragraph 615. And there's two other areas we're looking at for paragraph 616, which it would just be worthwhile getting your views as a forum tonight while we have this opportunity. So the first one is looking at the notional SEN funding. That's something we've done quite a lot of talking to with head teachers, bursaries, etc. of schools recently about how this is getting a higher profile. And this is the money that's identified in schools' budgets to help support the £6,000 of additional support needs that you are expected to cover from your main school budgets before you get any top up. So there's no statutory definition of how that should be calculated. We've not reviewed that for a number of years, so we do need to do that now. So we'll be doing that we'll probably do some proposals over the summer holidays and then be in a position to put something out to schools later on. I think my question on that one is that something we would be best asking all schools about, or is that something we could possibly put through the high needs subgroup? My main question on that is, what's the best way of getting schools' views on that? So it's probably best is there any immediate views on that question now, please? I think it's probably easy if we look at that one and then the next one afterwards.
I'm guessing we'd want to ask as widely as we could, so everybody can contribute.
All schools.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Thank you. That's very clear. So yeah. Okay. We'll include that on the consultation with all schools then. And then the second item there is something that some members of the forum will be familiar with. I think Stuart is, because part of the funding framework that the DfE have set up recognises that there's lots of pressure on high needs block budgets, and there is an opportunity. There's a provision in the funding regulations to with schools agreement to move some money out of the funding that goes to schools to help support the high needs block. And we've been talking the rest of the evening basically about all our financial challenges on the high needs block. So we asked this question 3 or 4 years ago, and that's something we're thinking about asking again in 24 on this consultation, that if it was agreed, it would be included in the 24-25 budget proposal. So up to 0.5% of the school's budget, which is about £450,000, can be switched from schools to the high needs block on the decision of the schools forum. So it's just seeking views on that really at this point in time.
Is that a request to ask schools if they're happy to put in 0.5 of their budget to support the high needs block?
I guess that's the absolute bottom line. I think it's just a case of asking what schools think of that. And I don't know. Can I also just ask Chris, because Chris did Chris want to say something on this? Because I think Chris has been quite interested in this as well. Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, I think Stuart knows that, because as chair of Schools Forum, I did ask him initially, and Stuart, you were very balanced in your response, saying, well, you understand the reason for the request, but also the local authority has to respect the very great tightness of schools' budgets at the moment. The issue for me is that the high needs block is a sort of burning platform. It consumes councils if you don't deal with it. Some of the council dealing with it may have to be additional expenditure. For example, the capital that we hold now will probably not be adequate to the amount of places that we need to generate in specialist support. And Stuart, I know you, amongst others, do believe additional specialist places are necessary in the system to help it work efficiently. We can't use the 0.5% for capital borrowing. That's a matter for the council. The Schools Forum is not a separate legal entity, but it can help defray other expenditure. So at first, what I said to Paul, who was again very thoughtful in his advice to me about raising this, what I said is we ought to get Schools Forum's members' initial views on consulting about it. Consulting about it isn't Schools Forum agreeing it. It's just agreeing that it's appropriate in the circumstances that we're in for the council to ask the question. But there is something I want to make clear following that consultation, and it's for instance, it's also based on the legal framework of the DSG and Schools Forum's powers. The 0.5% is whether to agree it is the decision of Schools Forum initially, but if the local authority doesn't agree that decision, it is allowed to appeal to the Secretary of State. In some cases that succeeds, in some cases it doesn't. Now, Chair, in the past, when I think it was 2019, Paul informed me, we did ask this question. Schools Forum says, we respect you asking it, but the answer is no. The executive at the time did not want to pursue that. We haven't asked the executive this time, which is new. The question has certainly not been asked of Councillor Bailey. But it is a possibility, if we do consult and Schools Forum says no, that the authority, believing it consulted appropriately, might well go to the Secretary of State for adjudication. And it's on that whole thing I'd like people's initial views. The reason I'm asking that is I don't want this to become a dispute. I would want it to be, if we proposed it, Schools Forum refused, and we went to the Secretary of State, it was a proper recognition of the position of the local authority and the rights of Schools Forum to oppose, but the right of the local authorities to appeal. So in other words, I wanted to go forward in the spirit of cooperation and not ruin what I think are very good working relations there. So that's, I think, what I was going to say, Paul.
Would anybody like to comment on that? I'm happy to, but there might be some other people who would like to. Go on, Roger.
I've got two things really. Firstly, I think you were suggesting a 0.5%. I'd like to know what the current contribution is. Secondly, it would, going forward with that approach, I think would be quite dangerous really in changing what has been in my experience, a very close and working relationship where the opinions of Forum have been taken very seriously by the local authority.
Yeah, Stuart, can I just reply to that? First of all, the current contribution of that is zero from schools. The 0.5 is something we have the power to do. So at the moment, it is nothing. Secondly, the way I tried to put things was an absolute respect of Schools Forum by the local authority. But respect doesn't mean to say we always hold the same view or forego from action we believe is best for the school system generally in Bracknell Forest. I'm not saying we would do it. I just want this discussion now, rather than there to be any surprise from Schools Forum members that didn't realise, if you don't agree, the local authority could pursue it to the DfE. I'm not saying we would do that. I'm just alerting you to the fact it's a possibility.
Can I just ask one follow-up question, and that's related to the £450,000. What would that mean for each of the schools if that was top sliced? How much?
It would mean, right, it would mean a 0.5% off the AWPU. Sorry, Paul, you should reply to this. It's finance.
Yeah,
Finance
basically, if we applied that funding decision in the current financial year, every school's budget would be 0.5% smaller.
Not special schools. It's
yes, so every mainstream
only
school
applies to mainstream school.
Yes, beg your pardon. Yeah, that's a good clarification. Thank you, Chris.
Paul, would that mean that we would be in deficit next year then, because we're just breaking even barely? But if we would lose approximately 0.5, our budget would be approximately, I'm saying 50 odd thousand, 40 to 50 to 30. We would be in a deficit budget then situation at the end of next year.
And yes, that's a possibility, but obviously there's lots of other circumstances and part of that come into a budget consideration. So whether you'd be in deficit would be dependent on a lot of other things, but you would have less income. But financial expenditure.
We're just zero-ish if we're lucky. The year after, we know we've got a deficit of 30-ish. So you're pushing us into a deficit budget that we've got to cater for. That's my worry as a school.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Liz, your hand's up.
It was around the fact that absolutely we can disagree, but it's about trying to present the reasoning behind it. So Roger, you jumped in and said quite rightly, what does that actually mean to our mainstream colleagues? So I'm in an academy myself, but I'd want to know what that means. £50,000 is an awful lot if we're talking about a primary budget for a 1-form entry. That could cripple a primary school. So absolutely, I understand that sometimes we might disagree with things, but I think just some better understanding of what that means.
Sorry, Paul, it would apply across maintained and academies, wouldn't it?
Yes, can I just clarify again? So it's mainstream schools it would apply to, not Kennel Lane, not the Prue.
All mainstream schools.
Yeah, every school that's funded through the national funding formula, and it wouldn't be 50,000. It wouldn't be anywhere near £50,000 for a 1-form entry primary school. We're talking about £450,000 in total across all schools. So a primary schools, a 1-form entry primary school, may be £1 million. So we're talking, £5,000 if I get my calculation out right. So it's not 50,000. Let me check.
Okay, I'm going to come to Stuart and then to you, Councillor Bailey. So Stuart.
I just wanted to echo those points really from Liz, because we are 1-form entry primary school. I know a number of 1-form entry primary schools in my cluster and within Bracknell, and we are in a deficit budget for next financial year, and £5,000 doesn't sound much to a lot of people, but for us it is, so that is a significant amount of money. That's a TA in the morning, for us. So it is something that we would really struggle to contribute towards 100%. And it needs noting that if schools are being asked to do that, what's going to support the schools with that additional deficit budget, and is it fair to ask for 5% from all, bearing in mind the different situations we're all in?
Okay, Councillor Bailey, then I'll come to you, Tim.
Yeah, I'd be very brief. There was a really interesting article in yesterday's Guardian by Sally Wheel, which some of you may have read, but it was quite alarming in the number of what it said in the last 8 years. The number of pupils on EHCPs has doubled. We've now got 500,000 of them, and it's causing massive budget deficit problems across the whole country. Very significant budget problems. So from where I'm coming from, all this conversation is obviously very interesting and needs to happen, but we need a determined effort to make sure government is aware and we get the additional funding that's needed. I don't know if that's going to be helpful or not, but that's my 2 pennyworth for the time being.
Thank you. Tim?
I just wanted to say, I don't think this is the discussion that we're due to have now. I think just in fairness to Chris, I think all he's saying is that we need to discuss it. So I understand why there is alarm. It's something new. It's something for us to think about. But I think I think Chris is just trying to say that we have an awareness of this as a possibility. And therefore, I think we need further conversations about it once it's sunk in, really.
Yeah, I think the question is, should it be added to the consultation? I don't think Forum can have any objection to it being consulted on, but I think you might have got a bit of a flavour of the views that might come back because of the state of school budgets at the moment.
Yeah, but just if I could just have a word. This is nothing that you didn't make clear to me when I approached you privately, and the conversation has gone exactly as you predicted. But that isn't a surprise. The only thing I'd say at the end is to reflect on what Paul said when he was looking at the DSG generally. It's at the moment a 6.3 million in-year deficit. That will rise to an overall deficit of 30 million for the council. I agree about the significant problems that schools budget has got. This is a huge issue for the authority. And the only thing, it's incredibly useful that Councillor Bailey is here, because we are entering into the consultation. We'd expect your frank views, but obviously it's the politicians that will determine eventually whether we go ahead as a local authority and make this proposal. So this discussion has been invaluable, and I think Tim, you're generous in your response, saying, look, I'm just trying to be frank with you about the reason that we're doing it and the potential ways this could go, and that whatever we do, I do not want it to be eroding in any way what I see as an excellent relationship between the local authority and members of the schools forum.
Cheryl, I can see you waving, and I'll come back to other hands that are up.
I just wanted to add something to this. I believe that this was considered in 2019, a few years ago. And when we started discussing this and whether to bring it forward, we felt it was probably timely to bring it to Schools Forum to consider again. And if we hadn't brought it forward, we wouldn't be doing our jobs by reflecting as to what the position is currently. So
my only comment on the
very
timing,
much an exploration of what Schools Forum consider at this point in time.
My only comment on that timing, Cheryl, and for Chris as well, is you want to time this if it's something that you want to pursue, and as Liz has said, make sure it's justified and sold.
Yes.
But whilst we're still in the process of written statement of action and all the improvements that are feeding through to SEN and the unspent capital money and the new school coming online, I'm not sure it's the best time to ask Forum and schools on that until some of those issues are addressed. Is it Janita? Sorry.
I am sorry as well. I can understand the need. However, like I'm just looking at my school, we have 5 children coming in from into reception who are of high needs, so working under 1 year of age, and we've only one EHCP for one of them. So we've got to find the money from our school budget to help see where their next best steps are. So that's another pressure on our budget next year. And I think lots of schools are finding, as you know, that there's a lot of high needs pupils that have to go into primary school now, and every bit of money is needed.
Thank you. Keith, you had your hand up. Did we cover your point?
I think you have, yeah. I think timing is everything. If you ask this in 12 months or 24 months, I'm ever the optimist. You might get a very different response from me, in the near future than you would at the moment. Because you're robbing people to pay Paul. If schools are adequately funded, then I think we might have a different approach to this. But the point that's just been made by Janita, I think it applies to us as well, because our budgets are, I know this is slightly ironic because I know the items will come out next, but we've had more pressure put on our budget because we're meeting needs that aren't diagnosed.
Okay. Paul, Chris, I think you've had our feedback on that.
Yeah.
But by all means, consult. I do think you need to consider the timing and the outcome of the consultation is a different meeting, isn't it? So, but thank you for making us aware. Paul, is there anything else you want to say on this before we move to the recommendations?
No, I would just echo Osmus. I think it's been very useful to hear what your views are, and I think it's Chris and Cheryl will go away and contemplate that, and we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's really, really useful to get that insight. Thank you. I'm glad we asked the question.
Are there any other comments on that report before we go to recommendations? In that case, it's page 46. So we are asked to note points 3.1 down to 3.6. So the overspend, the reason for the variance is the cumulative budget, the in-year funding transfers, and we've just given our feedback on the questions for consultation. I think they are duly noted. And then the second one is an agree. So the forum agrees it's 3.6, the formal policy wording associated with the new early years disability access reserve as set out in Annex B. Is there any dissent? Does anybody disagree? Okay, so the forum has agreed to 3.6. Paul, are we coming back to you?
Yeah, afraid so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, right. Yeah, thank you very much, Stuart. Yeah, so this is about school balances held by maintained schools at the end of 22-23. So again, this is an information report, and this is an annual report, and there are a couple of decisions that we're asking the forum to make. The first is around the application of our policy of potentially clawing back significant surplus balances held in schools, and the scheme defines what a significant surplus balance is, and it also sets out some areas where it's appropriate for schools to hold back money for purposes of future use. So the report sets out the 7 schools that have a significant surplus balance that have set out they have appropriate plans in place to spend that. It amounts to £558,000 and 7 schools, and they are summarised. That they're set out in Annex D. So the case is, the question is, are you content that those funds should be retained by the schools based on their returns, which are detailed in more information within the report. And the second area we're asking for a decision is that one school has actually exceeded the cap that we'd normally expect a surplus to achieve. So for primary schools, it's above 16%. And you can see in the paper that Crowthorne Primary School has exceeded that by £38,000. The policy does allow for schools to appeal what would normally be just an implementation of that clawback. And you'll see that the school has written in a letter Annex G, which is summarised a bit in paragraphs 615 to 616. So it's a case of the schools forum reviewing that, and they have the power to agree that the school can keep all or some of that money. And then if the forum do agree that the money should come back, then the school can actually make a final appeal to the Executive Director of Education, Executive Director of People, and then that would be the final decision on this. So there are a couple of decisions to be made around the school's balances there, please. So just a quick rundown on some of the key points in the paper. There's quite a lot of information in there. There's some tables, graphs, etc. And I'm sure if you're interested, you've had a good look at those sorts of things. But in general terms, as you'd expect, school balances have reduced last year, so they went down by £182,000, and they now stand at 2.489 million. In general, average balances are now at 4.4% of annual income, which is a reduction of 4.9%. But there is quite a difference between the primary phase and secondary phase, because primary phase has only about average balance of 3.6%. So that's getting quite close to a level where we would say it will be difficult to manage in-year emergencies or difficulties. So and the particular problems that all schools have been facing, obviously the cost of living difficulties, but primary schools have also had an issue of falling rolls, which has also impacted on the money that's in the system as well. So the primary schools have had a particularly hard year last year, and that's obviously reflected in the balances. So I don't think there's anything else I particularly want to highlight in that report. So there's a couple of decisions there for you, or if there's any other comments, that'd be good to hear those as well, please.
Okay, Paul, I think I've got a comment to raise here that's not in the report around the energy contract. Just to say that I've written to the local authority on behalf of Forum over some concerns regarding the energy contract.
Do you live in London?
Yeah.
Chris, sorry, your phone is, you're still on speaker, Chris, sorry.
Sorry.
So we've written to the local authority to query whether the current energy contract that we have been signed up to, or that some schools have been signed up to, delivers best value, whether we are tied in and how we are tied in. I've raised some concerns about the fact that the prices were shared with schools after the auto renewal period, and whether or not it's possible to exit that contract, or for individual schools to contract, because it is significantly above current market prices, and that will affect schools and their balances going forward. So I have had a response from Richard Skegg, to which Grania has been included, just to state that they procure the energy through the Crown Commercial Services. They have to follow the contract which is available. They procure an amount of energy over time rather than necessarily the unit rates as we might be used to procuring, and that over a period of time that system has delivered good value to schools, although there is recognition that for the current period it is more expensive than could have been achieved had schools done something short term and on their own. There's also acknowledgement around transparency and not being as transparent as would be ideal, and they've pledged to do something about this in the future, and they have confirmed that to exit the contract you need to give 12 months notice at the beginning of the financial year. So therefore, if notice wasn't served in April this year, people are in that contract until April 25. The one possible positive that was mentioned is that rate will be renewed when you get to April next year. So if you are tied in, we're tied into that high price for the current financial year, but next April 24, there is hope that that price that's being paid will be adjusted, and that may be a significant adjustment to help school budgets the following year. So I just for transparency wanted people to know that we have raised that concern and we have had a response. So if there's any comments on that in particular before we go to balances. In that case, are there any comments on the published document that people want to raise? Okay, sure. Going. In that case, page 60 for the recommendations. Okay, so the first item, 3.1, is to note the information provided on school balances as presented in the report, to note the requirement to complete the action plan. Are we happy to note those? Any dissent? Okay, so forum has noted 3.1 and 3.2. And then I think probably the more challenging one is about maybe it's not challenging actually, but agreeing for schools whether there's clawbacks or not. Nothing has been raised. So 3.3, the entire significant surplus balances held by schools up to the cap permitted in the clawback scheme has been assigned for relevant purposes. So 3.3, are we happy with the schools that have identified balances up to the permitted amount? We're all happy with that. There's no dissent, so we can all agree to 3.3. 3.4 then is a question for us. What amount, if any, of the significant sum for the surplus balance above the cap from Crowthorne Primary should be clawed back? Is there anybody, we've all read that information in the case put forward by Crowthorne, is there anybody that feels any of that money should be clawed back?
No.
In that case, Paul, do we agree for 3.4 that there's no clawback? Is that what you'd like us to record?
Yeah, I think that's your decision, is that the school keep all that money and no clawback is implemented, yeah.
Okay,
That's
so we're
my
all
reading.
agreed that no clawback is implemented. Janita.
Hold on, just very quickly, Paul, on top of that, because what's the budget look like next year for that school as well? Because do they need the money to just break even next year? Just a thought that, yes, no clawback.
I have not. I mean, obviously, it's a case of targeting schools that need support to balance their budgets. That's not been raised as an issue of balancing their budget. I would have been quite shocked if they did need help balancing their budget next year. So if they've not raised an issue with me, then obviously I'm going to have to concentrate on the schools where there are difficulties. So I don't know that answer, but I imagine they've managed to balance their budget without too many difficulties.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've agreed no clawback. Thank you very much. Is it more of Paul? Item number 9, please.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. Yes, okay, so this is another annual report, and hopefully this will be the quickest of the lot. So this just goes through some of the application of funds that we hold initially centrally by the council for allocation to schools in year, when data becomes available to allow us to apply that funding through the criteria in the policy that we have set up for a number of funding streams. So this report reports back what's been done there, and it's also an opportunity for you to look at those policies and see whether there's any changes that you would like to make, and also for us to propose changes. So we're proposing one change really just to completely clarify how we do a calculation on the SEN contingency, because there's been some uncertainty and some unfortunately some inconsistency over the years of how we've applied that. So we want to just sort of nail that one down now. Other than that, it's just about trying to make sure that the policies as they stand are clear. And so there's one or two bits that we're looking to change there. Other than that, I don't think there's anything else really that I would like to highlight.
Okay, any questions or queries from members? Okay, in that case, if we move to recommendations, page 81. So again, 3.1 and 3.2 are for the forum to note the items in this paper. I think we can agree that they've been noted. And then in 3.3, there is an agree, and that is to minor changes to the text to improve the clarity of the policy and updating that's relevant to 6.33. Any dissent? In that case, forum has agreed to 3.3. That brings us to any other business. I've just got one reminder, and that's a thank everybody, because I think this is our last forum meeting of the year. The next meeting is in September, and a reminder, if not a plea, that the positions of chair and vice chair are vacated each year and elected again in September, and we would welcome any members standing forward for that. I promise Paul provides detailed briefing notes, and we would welcome people stepping forward to the roles in September. Paul, anything else?
I think that's perfect again, Stuart. Thank you.
In that case, well done. Thank you all very much.